and the need for effective dissemination of complex scientific information to diverse audiences. This has been made possible by innovations in science communication. Now, if we look at the past, communication wasn't as advanced as we look at it today, because in more cases, we are looking at the traditional means of communication, whereby by the time information gets to somebody, it's either distorted, it's not clear, or it's quite late. But today, it's easy to access any information from almost anywhere, as long as you have a screen in front of you, be it the television, be it a phone, be it anything that can reflect information, even documents, books, encyclopedias, any kind of document. You're able to access information from almost anywhere. Now, some of these advancements have gone an extra mile to give almost a realistic experience to individuals, because having that not all of us have done science, it means that some of the terminology, some of the innovations, some of the processes might be quite hard for us to understand. Think about this. Not all of us know how to swim, but most of us are curious to want to understand what's really happening at the bottom of the ocean. What kind of creatures live at the bottom of the ocean? But now, with the presence of interactive and immersive experiences, this has been made possible because you can now have an almost realistic experience when it comes to understanding what really happens at the bottom of the sea, how does it look like, what kind of creatures live at the bottom of the sea. And now, this is one of the major innovations that has really contributed highly to science communication. Utilizing virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality technologies to create immersive experience that allows audiences to explore scientific concepts in a hands-on manner. This can include virtual lab simulations, interactive exhibits, and 360-degree videos. In Africa, virtual lab simulations, interactive exhibits, and 360-degree videos have been utilized in various scientific communication initiatives to make scientific concepts more accessible and engaging to diverse audiences. We're just going to look at some of the areas that have utilized this advancement to enable easy communication and passing of scientific information. One of those areas, it's the science education and outreach programs. Unlike before, one will just stand in front of an audience and try to communicate a given information. Let's look, for instance, at traditional way of learning, whereby a teacher will walk in front of the classroom, just try to explain certain aspects of science. And it was even quite difficult for some learners to understand because they've never interacted with some of the information that the teacher gets to share. But now, with the presence of immersive experiences, science has been made easy. Now, when it comes to science education and outreach programs, organizations across Africa have integrated virtual lab simulations into science education and outreach programs to supplement traditional laboratory experiences. This simulation allows learners to conduct virtual experiments in subjects such as biology, chemistry, and physics, even in regions where access to physical lab equipment is limited. For example, in Africa, the African Virtual University offers online courses with virtual lab components to students across the continent. It has established the largest distance and e-learning network in over 27 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, look at this. Africa is a third world continent, and in most cases, you're still trying to catch up with certain advancements. Now, when it comes to even learning in institutions, some schools are not well versed enough or well equipped to have facilities such as laboratories to be able to carry out science experiments. But with virtual reality, this has been made easy because you might not, it's even actually easy and possibly cheaper, because you can now carry out some of these experiments and have an almost realistic experience in carrying out these processes. And also, it goes an extra mile to enable clear understanding of some of these scientific processes. The second one, we're looking at science museum and exhibitions. I don't know how many of us have been privileged to walk into museums and to just have that experience of probably some of the histories of our countries or processes or, whatever goes on. If you've been lucky to access museums, some of these museums are way too advanced, and they enable you to have an experience in that You are able to go back in time, yeah, and to interact with some of the things that existed in the past, because this has been made possible by this information being captured in this kind of technology. Science museums and exhibitions in Africa have embraced interactive exhibits and 360-degree videos to enhance visitors' engagement and learning experiences. For instance, the South African Museum in Cape Town features interactive exhibits that allows visitors to explore topics such as biodiversity, evolution, and astronomy through hands-on activities and immersive multimedia displays. Another area where this has been applied is in health education and training. This has actually come way in handy for health practitioners because, unlike before, you don't necessarily need to have an expert coming on board on the ground to be able to carry out certain trainings. It has been made possible in that we can have a trainer operating from a different country and is carrying out the training for individuals who are in a different country. Therefore, this has enabled people to fast track, or rather health practitioners to fast track certain processes that are science-based. Virtual lab simulations are being used in Africa to train healthcare professionals and students in medical and laboratory techniques. For example, the Virtual Lab School of Health in Nigeria offers online courses and virtual lab simulations to healthcare workers, allowing them to practice clinical skills and procedures in safe and controlled environment. These simulations are particularly valuable for training in areas such as diagnostic testing, disease surveillance, and infection control. Now, I really appreciate if probably we have a friend on this platform from Nigeria who can probably, if they've interacted with this, can give us further details of how effective this has been. Because so far, this is the information I managed to grasp when it comes to such kind of facilities. Another area that where this has been applied is in conservation and environmental education. We see this in the Nairobi National Museum in Kenya, where it has featured interactive exhibits on wildlife conservation and environmental sustainability, allowing visitors to learn about local ecosystems and conservation efforts through immersive and a multimedia experience. In short, all this goes an extra mile to enable the unknowing audience to have a clear understanding of really what something is all about. Now, STEM outreach programs. Virtual lab simulations, interactive exhibits, and 360-degree videos are being incorporated in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics outreach programs in Africa to inspire and engage young learners. Organizations such as the African Institute of Mathematics Science and the Next Instant Forum host STEM festivals and workshops that include hands-on activities, virtual lab demonstrations, and immersive multimedia experience to ignite interest in STEM subjects among African youth. So basically that also just examples of where interactive and immersive experience has been utilized when it comes to science communication. Another innovation that you're looking at today is data visualization and infographics. I can't really say this is an innovation, but having that, it's still up to date, and it enables scientists to communicate complex data in a summarized way. It means it's still relevant and it's being utilized for present communication. With the increasing availability of big data and complex scientific data sets, there's a growing emphasis on visualizing data in clear and engaging ways. Infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts are being used to make complex information more accessible and understandable to non-expert audiences. In Africa, infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts are frequently used in health education campaigns to communicate complex medical and public health information to non-expert audiences. Organizations like the World Health Organization and local health ministries often utilize these tools to illustrate disease prevalence, vaccination rates, and healthcare access in a visually appealing and easily understandable format. I think this is one of the most common means of communication that has been in existence for the longest time, because it has enabled an easy breakdown of information, and therefore it's still very applicable. Now, some of these areas where this has been applied, we are looking at environmental awareness initiatives. Of course, NGOs and conservation organizations in Africa employ infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts to raise awareness about environmental issues such as deforestation, climate change, and wildlife conservation. These tools help convey scientific data and research findings to the general public, facilitating information decision make, making facilitating information decision making and community engagement in environmental conservation efforts. Probably, if at all you've interacted with these means of communication in any way and it has proven effective so far, I would appreciate you share with us an experience at the comment section, or probably you can just raise your hand and can contribute at the end of this presentation. Another area where this has been utilized is in STEM education programs. In the context of science, technology, and engineering and mathematics education initiatives, infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts are used to simplify complex scientific concepts and make them more accessible to students and educators. For example, educational institutions and STEM outreach organizations across Africa incorporate these tools into curriculum materials, lesson plans, and online resources to enhance learning outcomes and promote scientific literacy. As clear as it is. This has also been used in agricultural processes, experiences, and services, whereby we are seeing the visual tools enable farmers to make informed decisions about agricultural practices, improve productivity, and adapt to environmental changes. Very key. It has also been used in research communication. And I think this is the common area where this has been applied in most cases, because whenever there's research being carried out, there's definitely information at the end of it all. And this information is often being displayed in infographics. Now, researchers and scientists in Africa often use infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts to communicate their findings to non-academic audiences, including policymakers, journalists, and the general publics. These visual communication tools help distill complex research findings into easily digestible formats, facilitating knowledge transfer and increasing the impact of scientific research in society. Now, if by any chance you have been able to access the newsletters from Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium, some of these findings have been displayed in infographics formats, and this has enabled clear summary understanding of this information. Therefore, it means this means of communication is very relevant, and scientists can often apply when it comes to putting information out there. This has also been used in community development projects, and the NGOs and development organizations in Africa employ infographics, data visualization, and interactive charts to communicate projects. It is as simple as it is. Now, we are looking at science podcasts and audiovisual content. The last time I took part in a forum that was organized by Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium. We learned a variety of these communication platforms that have been utilized by scientists, whereby we are having a scientist come on board for a given discussion, and they're able to share any given information from a professional perspective. And this has enabled even an interaction with the publics, because most often we have seen individuals who have called in or sent in their comments to just contribute actively to these conversations. And by virtue of just engaging various individuals in these conversations through podcast and audiovisual content, this has enabled scientists to understand perspectives from the publics, and also the publics to understand some of these processes step by step. The popularity of podcast continues to rise, and many science communicators are leveraging this medium to reach audiences with engaging audio content. Additionally, platforms like YouTube and TikTok are being used to create short-form science videos that capture attention and convey key scientific concepts in a digestible format. Such include Saibon Discovery Center, located in Johannesburg, South Africa. They often produce educational videos on science topics and host and events related to STEM education. Aside from this program going on in South Africa. We have also seen basically in many organizations have always shared audiovisual content that have often summarized certain processes, inventions, diseases, if there's an outbreak. And these videos have often summarized what's really happening in the shortest way possible. Now, as a journalist, I've also packaged news information in videos, and it has always been effective because at the end of the day, I've always received feedback from the publics who have either given their opinion or who are also surprised by what's going on, if at all they were not informed. And I can really say that this means of communication is effective. Now, we are looking at citizen science initiatives. Citizen science projects involve members of the public in a scientific research, allowing them to contribute data, observations, and insight to scientific studies. These initiatives not only facilitate scientific discovery, but also promote public engagement with science and increase scientific literacy. Citizen science projects have been applied in various scientific research areas across Africa, engaging communities in data collection, observation, and research participation. Some of these areas where this has been applied, including biodiversity monitoring, where scientists in Africa have contributed to biodiversity monitoring effects by recording observations of plants, animals, and ecosystems. For instance, projects like the Naturalist and the African Bird Atlas engage volunteers in documenting species distribution and behavior. Another area where this has been applied in environmental conservation, where several initiatives involving citizen scientists in monitoring environmental health and conservation efforts. In South Africa, the Living Lands Project engages local communities in monitoring river health and implementing restoration actions, while the Mara Predator Conservation Program in Kenya involves volunteers in tracking and monitoring predator population. And this does not only happen in the two mentioned countries. We see these activities going on in several other countries that I might not have mentioned here, but oftentimes when it comes to environmental matters, the publics have always been involved directly. Now, when it comes to health, disease, and surveillance, citizen science projects in Africa have been utilized for disease surveillance and public health research. For example, initiatives like the malaria spot engage volunteers in analyzing malaria-infected blood samples through an online platform, contributing to malaria research and monitoring effects. Another area where this has been applied is in climate change research, where citizen scientists contribute to climate change research by collecting weather data, monitoring changes in vegetation, and documenting environmental changes. For example, the Rainforest Connection project involves local communities in monitoring and protecting forests using smartphone technology in Cameroon and other African countries. I would really appreciate our friends from those countries if they can give us further information on such activities. Okay, another innovation in science communication that you're looking at today is science cafes and public dialogues. Well, excuse me. Whereas in most cases, if at all you clearly understand you clearly understand a given kind of information when someone has a one-on-one engagement with you, because you have room for consultation, you have room to give immediate feedback, and it enables understanding. Therefore, these cafes really go an extra mile to ensure that the unknowing publics have a clear understanding by engaging with stakeholders and the scientists in these kind of conversations. It's more so like a date, when you go out on a date and you want to get to know somebody, you get to have an interaction with this individual and they'll give you a feedback depending on what you're sharing with them. And it enables you to understand who they really are. Now, actually, this is how science cafes and public dialogues tend to work. Science cafes, panel discussions, and public forums provide opportunities for scientists to engage directly with the public, both in formal and informal settings. These events foster open dialogue, encourage questions, and help build trust between scientists and the communities. Now, one of the examples I'm going to use is it's one that happens in Kenya, and it's called the measure. In long, if I'm just to treat the entire name, it's the Media for Environment, Science, Health, and Agriculture in Kenya. It is a non-profit association of journalists and communicators who are specialized in environmental, agriculture, health, technology, and development reporting. I do believe that we have some of our SECO members who are in this platform, and they can also just share probably the impact this has had when it comes to science, communication, right? Uh-huh. Something else that you're looking today is the social media engagement. Of course, we looked at the podcasts and the TikTok. TikTok, of course, it's being considered one of the social media platforms. But now, when you look at the social media engagements, we are looking at across all social media platforms. So we're looking at Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, probably Facebook, and so on and so forth. In most cases, even as we sit on this, as we sit through this webinar, we have our phones. We are scrolling through social media. Some of us are still scrolling through social media just to figure out what's happening, where and why something is happening. So in most cases, most of us are on social media because we have access to the device called the phone. And therefore it means people no longer have to sit in front of the television to stay up to date. Information is accessible almost anywhere. And in most cases, social media being the biggest takeover right now, it means that if at all science groups and science platforms are not aligning with the modern trends when it comes to social media communication, so much is likely to be left behind. Social media platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn are increasingly being used by scientists and science communicators to share research findings, engage with followers, and participate in online conversations about, say, science-related topics. Hashtags and trending topics are used to amplify the reach of scientific content and facilitate discussions. Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium has been on the forefront in using this method of communicating scientific processes and updates to the publics. Now, with the modern times, right now we look at things like individuals going live on social media. And like before, you will just post whatever you have to post and leave. But right now you can go live and just have an audience that will interact with you depending on what you're trying to put out there. Therefore, if we can also incorporate this in when it comes to certain science live programs, whereby we are engaging publics and them participating in some of these conversations, it will go an extra mile to ensure the information, or rather individuals and the public, stay up to date. Another thing you're looking at today is science journalism and innovations. Traditional science journalism is evolving to adapt to digital media landscapes. Online platforms are experimenting with new storytelling formats, multimedia content, and interactive features to engage readers and provide in-depth coverage of scientific topics. Now, I don't know the how media activities and individuals are in other countries. But in Kenya, in newsrooms, when you look at mainstream media, we have categories of journalists. We have the political journalist, environmental journalist, and we have also the science journalist who have specialized in focusing on scientific information and doing research around science and ensuring they relay information and updates when it comes to the science world. Therefore, if we're going to have science platforms and groups partnering with these individuals, for sure we're going to have so much of science information out there, including feature stories, talk shows, on the ground live activities, etc., etc. We're looking at science, art, and creativity. Now, in most cases, when you mention science, the moment you walk somewhere and you just mention the word science, what people think about is something difficult, something complicated, something hard to understand, science is hardly associated with something being simple and easy to understand. Therefore, with the we have seen creativity, advancement in creativity, unlike before, where individuals would be called to forums to just sit down and have this engagement going on, or sit through a class to learn about science. This has been incorporated in modern day entertainment. We are seeing science being featured in films, being featured in music, being featured in, every other thing that is considered entertaining in the modern world. Exploring the intersection of science and art can lead to innovative ways of communicating scientific concepts. Artists, filmmakers, and performers are collaborating with scientists to create visually stunning and resonant work that conveys complex ideas in unique ways. Here are some examples of collaborations between artists, filmmakers, performers, and scientists in Africa, leading to innovative works that explore the intersection of science and art. Um, the Sync project in South Africa. I don't know if any of us on this platform has interacted with this, but I came across, actually, I've never interacted with this, but I learned about it recently, and I felt it's such a creative way of going about communicating science. The Sync project is a collaboration between scientists, musicians, and artists aiming to explore the therapeutic effect of music. Based in South Africa, this project involves researchers from various disciplines working alongside musicians and artists to create music and visual artworks that promote health and well-being. Uh-huh. Now, there is this film called The Burial of Koji. I wish I was able to share a trailer, but because of time, I think you can just find time and go and look at the trailer, or even watch the movie if you have time. Apparently, the movie features um, more about environmental degradation, family loss, and somehow it involves science in the whole story. The Burial of Koji is a film directed by a Ghanaian musician and filmmaker. The film blends elements of magical realism with social commentary, exploring themes of family loss and environmental degradation. Through its innovative storytelling and visual styles, the film addresses complex issues while engaging audiences emotionally. Now, STEM galleries in Nigeria. STEM galleries in Nigeria promote collaborations between scientists, artists, technologists to create immersive art installations and exhibitions. These spaces serve as platforms for uh, interdisciplinary dialogues and creative expression, fostering innovative approaches to communicating scientific concepts and addressing societal challenges. Now, interdisciplinary collaborations. I think this is quite clear by now because in most cases, different groups have to come together for certain things to be successful. Now, when it comes to science communication, because science involves almost every other aspect of life, scientists often collaborate with individuals such as stakeholders, journalists, educators, artists, policymakers, etc. And by doing so, this enables other individuals from other areas to understand, first of all, what is science all about and what are some of the processes and innovations that are on board. And this enables them to also be able to communicate to their immediate um, subjects, plus even friends and families and other individuals that surround their lives. And therefore, by means of just interacting with other individuals about it, it enables information to get further and for science to be understood even better. Collaborations between scientists, communicators, educators, artists, policymakers, and other stakeholders are becoming increasingly common. These interdisciplinary partnerships facilitate the development of innovative science communication strategies that leverage diverse expertise and perspectives. Now, of course, we're looking at, just a minute, my screen seems to, sorry for that. So what impact do we see from these innovations in Africa? Of course, already I've mentioned some of the impacts through the examples for every other aspect, but that these key impacts that stood out for me, but I'm open to receiving or someone telling me other impacts that they've experienced at the individual level. Now, the digital platform and social media. In Africa, this trend is seen in the rise of science blogs, YouTube channels, podcasts, and social media accounts dedicated to science communication. These platforms provide opportunities for scientists and science enthusiasts to engage with a diverse audience across the continent. Over time, you have seen the rise of science content creators, social media platforms, and they actually have a big following because and that means that uh, many individuals are interested to learn more about science, or that those people who are really associated with such kind of information and they're keen on trying to understand really what's going on in the science world. Citizen science. In Africa, citizen science initiatives are empowering communities to participate in research relevant to local issues such as environmental conservation, public health, and biodiversity monitoring. These initiatives foster collaboration between scientists and local communities, leading to more inclusive and contextually relevant research outcomes. When it comes to storytelling and narrative techniques, science communicators are increasingly using storytelling and narrative techniques to make complex scientific concepts more accessible and engaging to the general public. In Africa, storytelling has always been an integral part of traditional knowledge transmission. By incorporating storytelling into science communication efforts, researchers and educators are able to connect with diverse audiences and bridge cultural gaps. Now, science diplomacy and policy engagement. Science communication plays a crucial role in informing policy decisions and promoting international cooperation on scientific issues. In Africa, science diplomacy initiatives aim to strengthen collaboration between African countries and the global scientific community. These efforts include hosting international scientific conferences, participating in joint research projects, and advocating for evidence-based policymaking at both national and regional levels. Lastly, multidisciplinary collaboration. And this has stood out lately, and whereby various organizations and individuals have often come together for a common goal. Collaboration between scientists, journalists, artists, and other stakeholders is becoming more common in science communication. This multidisciplinary collaboration results in innovative approaches to communicating science, such as science-themed art exhibitions, science-themed music festivals, and science-inspired literature. In Africa, initiatives like science cafes, where scientists engage in informal discussions with the public in coffee shops or community centers, are gaining popularity as platforms for interdisciplinary dialogue. There's so much more when it comes to some of the impacts this has had when it comes to science communication in Africa. But I had to pick out the 5 because for me they stood out. Now, in conclusion, the domain of scientific communication is developing at a fast pace, spurring on by new trends and breakthroughs that are revamping the methods of research, dissemination, and access. Some of the transformative developments include open access data sharing, interactive publications, Altimetrics, AI, and online collaboration platforms. By adapting these trends, transparency is promoted, scientific discovery is accelerated, and collaboration within the scientific community is enhanced. As technology continues to progress, we can anticipate other exciting advancements that will provide researchers with empowerment and facilitate global knowledge sharing. It means change is dynamic and change keeps on coming on board. And as far as these are some of the advancements that I've picked out, there is more to come, and therefore it's just all about staying updated with what's trending, what works for now and what works for what audience. Thank you so much. I've been your presenter, Cecilia, and I do hope that I've been able to share knowledge enough to equip somebody with something that they didn't have. Thank you so much. Hello, Carol.
Yes, thank you, Cecilia. So I believe Aruna has a few questions that she's supposed to ask
Oui,
in regards to the presentation.
oui, allô, vous m'entendez? Allô? Ok,
Go
merci bien,
ahead,
Cécilia
Aruna.
Lubangu. Mon micro était, on dirait, éteint. Sinon, j'étais en train de vous remercier pour votre brillante présentation. Cela nous a permis de comprendre un peu les différentes facettes de ces nouvelles tendances de communication dans le domaine scientifique, les différents impacts que cela pouvait avoir. Alors, nous avons deux questions qui nous sont parvenues. Et la première question est la suivante. Et vous avez parlé tantôt, c'est un des participants qui a posé la question. Vous avez parlé tantôt que vous utilisez un peu, comment peut-on utiliser la science dans un musée, par exemple, pour que le grand public puisse comprendre. Voilà, donc ça, c'est la question qui a été posée par un des participants, parce que vous avez parlé tantôt un peu des musées dans votre présentation. La personne voulait savoir comment peut-on présenter la science dans un musée pour que le grand public puisse comprendre. Donc, on va vous laisser répondre à cette question. Et il y a une deuxième question, on pourra peut-être donner la parole aux participants de poser leurs questions. Merci. Vous êtes là? Allô? Allô?
Aruna, I can hear you.
Yes, yes,
But
yes, yes,
I think I'll request you translate the same to English so that
yes.
I'm also able to understand probably if you're asking a question or passing a compliment. Yeah.
Okay, I will ask it in English.
Okay.
Okay, okay, so I was saying that a participant asked a question about you talk about a museum in your presentation, and this person want to know how can we present science in a museum to ensure that the larger public understand. Is it clear?
Okay, let me try to rephrase your question. You're asking if how can we use museums
Yeah,
to
the
have
science.
the larger audience understand, to have a clear understanding of any scientific information? Is that your question?
Yes, this is the question asked by one of the participants.
Okay, then if I got you clearly, well, in my presentation, I mentioned this advancement as one of the means for the publics to understand about any scientific processes or any history about science. And museum is one of the areas whereby we are having science information being reserved. And of course, we have different audiences in different areas. There are those audiences you'll find in church. There are those audiences who will choose to go work at the museum. There are those audiences you can call on a forum and they'll come on board. So depending on how you want to have your information, the only innovation as to why I mentioned the museum, it's when we're using immersive processes. That is I mentioned the augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality in terms of communication. Now, that's just an example of where this has been applied. But when it comes to actual communication using this kind of technology, it means that you are able to introduce the audience to an almost realistic experience when it comes to these processes, so that they don't they don't just listen to what you're saying, but they get to also understand what something looks like, what was it all about, how was the experience, by giving them that almost realistic experience. And this has been applied now in museums. But now when it comes to a museum, honestly, it can't be the the place where we are saying that you're going to have it as a platform of communication. But of course, you're also looking at the audience that goes to visit or to learn about scientific processes in the museum. How best do they get to have a grasp of the what's going on there? When such kind of technology is also at the museum, it enables them to have a clear understanding. I hope I'm clear. Does that answer
OK,
your
je
question?
pense que le participant a obtenu satisfaction. Et nous allons peut-être aller à la deuxième question. C'est un des participants qui a également posé sa question. La question m'est venue en français, donc je vais lire la question en français pour que vous essayiez de voir dans quelle mesure vous pouvez répondre à la question. Et voilà, la personne a dit que la difficulté de communiquer sur des sujets complexes tels que les manipulations génétiques est que même au plus haut niveau, les autorités n'y croient vraiment pas. Et la personne voudrait savoir, sa préoccupation est de savoir si une action spécifique est nécessaire pour les convaincre. Et si oui, quel type d'action? Ça, c'est la première phase de sa question. Et deuxièmement, les médias couvrent très peu de questions complexes telles que les manipulations génétiques, en particulier la question spécifique du gene drive. Cela est dû au modèle économique des médias dans les pays francophones. Ne pensez-vous pas que Oda Nepad, qui est en charge de cette question au niveau de l'Union africaine, pourrait aider à résoudre ces problèmes et permettre une meilleure communication sur ces questions? Est-ce que vous avez pu capter un peu la substance de cette question?
Aruna, thank you so much. I don't know if I can jump in because I've just been forwarded to the question that you're asking. I think I answered it generally, but if I may just read for the rest of the individuals to understand and for me to respond to the question. Someone asked that the difficulty of communicating on complex subjects, such as the genetic manipulation, is that even at the highest level, the authorities don't really believe in it. My concern is whether any specific action is needed to convince them, and if so, what kind of action? Secondly, there is very little media coverage of complex issues such as genetic manipulation, especially in specific questions of gene drive. This is due to the economic model of the media in French-speaking countries, okay? Don't you think that Auda Nipad, which is in charge of this issue at the level of the African Union, could help solve this problem and enable better communication on this issue? That's a very, very, very genuine concern. And I would say, as I said, different countries have different policies when it comes to media. As I don't know how much coverage is done when it comes to scientific information in the country that this individual has put the question across. But what I would say, science is still in the process of trying to put itself out there because science has been in existence for a long time. But when it comes to being able to communicate effectively, that is what has been the problem. And this is the reason as to why we are even having such forums going on. Therefore, I would say we're just trying to share some of the ideas that can enable to make science easy and communicatable, so that you're able to have this information across media platforms. Now, when it comes to mainstream media and coverage, let's say poor coverage, in Kenya, we have seen partnerships between journalists and science stakeholders. And in some of these scenarios, you have seen scientists who have come to the studio to take part in key conversations that are science-based. And therefore, I wouldn't say that there is poor coverage in Kenya as per se, but what I would say, of course, it also engages stakeholders when it comes to advancing some of this information, depending on the level of partnerships in those countries. If we can have journalists, science stakeholders, and even government stakeholders coming on board in terms of partnership, to ensure that they address this matter, that will go an extra mile to ensure that science communication is in the public domain. Now, when it comes to this, the first question, the difficulty in communicating complex subjects such as gene drive. As I've said, I've been giving examples of some of the easiest way we can go about communicating this information, because people have different people have different ways of grasping information. Some individuals, they grasp information better through music, some through reading books, some through watching those programs on television, some by just simple communication on social media. So if we can design this information to fit different social media platforms and different means of technology, so that you're targeting all kinds of audiences, then you're going to communicate to a larger audience. It takes one person at a time, one goal at a time, because we can't just say today we're going to hack this situation by doing some miracle today and you're communicating to everyone. It's not possible. But you're seeing progress in that you're on this platform. You're an individual from a different country. You are conversing with someone from a different country over the same topic. What does that mean? It's possible for us to come on board over the same kind of concern and be able to come up with solutions that can address some of these problems depending on policies in different countries. I hope I've answered your question.
OK, merci bien, Madame Cécilia Lubangou, pour votre présentation. Nous sommes en train d'être pris du coup par le temps. Nous allons vous remercier et passer incessamment à la deuxième communication. Et merci bien, Madame Cécilia, et à sous peu. Alors, nous allons poursuivre un peu notre programme. Et le deuxième communicateur se nomme Joseph Okpoku Bako. Et il fait partie, lui, il est du côté de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Hein. C'est un Ghanéen, il vient du Ghana. Cécilia, comme je l'avais souligné, elle est de l'Afrique de l'Est. Elle est du Kenya. Voilà. Donc, je vais lire un peu la bibliographie de Joseph. Je pense que la lecture se fera mieux en anglais. Okay, I will read the bio of Joseph Opoku Bako, who is our second speaker.
Now, Aruna,
yes?
If I may just interrupt, let me answer this final question. Someone has sent a different question.
Okay.
Okay, and someone is asking.
Sorry, you can.
Oh, okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
Someone is asking, the emerging tools, talk trends used to communicate science communication come with challenges, especially as the world becomes more isolated and every other person is an expert. How then do we ensure that propagation of misinformation is checked out only? Accurate content is put out for consumption. Questions by Cyrus. Thank you so much, Cyrus, for that question. Basically, Cyrus is having a concern whereby there is the issue of propaganda and real news. So how do we separate that? Well, Cyrus, you have had that issue for a very long time when it comes to science communication and I think it's not just something that is happening when it comes to science communication. Even in basic news, general news, we have had propaganda on social media platforms, you have had propaganda going on, and then you find out later that wasn't the right information. Now, for the forums that you are carried out as as Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium, we have seen that we can try curtail this by having some stakeholders coming on board for certain conversation to demystify certain misinformation and myths. Because in most cases, when you're just having someone drafting information and posting it on social media, it's not it can't be fully trusted unless it's coming from an expert. When you're having experts addressing some of these concerns, some of these questions, it will go an extra mile to demystify certain rumors and misconception. Secondly, it's important that we learn to distinguish between genuine social media platforms or genuine platforms and the other platforms that are not really genuine, because there are those platforms that have been classified to be genuine. For instance, if we say that Africa Genetic Biocontrol Consortium have a social media platform, I think they just have one platform. Someone might try to create a photocopy of the same account or the same social media platform elsewhere. But if we have stakeholders and such kind of programs going on, it will be so easy for us to be able to distinguish between real platforms and fake platforms and even fake news, because it's always good to clarify as an individual. Don't just jump into the first information that you come across and assume that's the fact. If you have access to a stakeholder, a professional, a specialist in a given area that is scientific, and you want them to clarify certain information for you, it's important that you learn to share such information so that it is demystified as a wrong information. Something else, maybe if I may just use this, like in Kenya, we have social media platforms and we have television stations. News can trend on social media platform because right now it's easy to access news almost anytime. You don't need to sit in front of the TV to access news. But when it comes to really clarifying if this information is true, we have proper, or not proper, there's mainstream media that is identified as the proper media that will have this package as news, and you'll be able to access this in you'll be able to access this at the right time, and you'll be able to have a clear understanding of really what's going on. So it's important that even as scientists, to always come on board to contribute to certain conversations, so that you're trying to demystify or to distinct false from true when it comes to science, information, and innovation. For instance, if I may just mention an example, we saw during the COVID-19 period, whereby there were stories about, certain vaccines will make you grow, I don't know, horns and all that, you see. But if you seek proper medical consultation and you had clarity from professional, it was easier. It would have been easier for you to have a clear understanding of what are you putting into your body. But if you just to go somewhere, you have just been called to do something or to take some certain vaccine, and you don't even have clarity of what is it that you're taking into your body, of course you're going to just consume anything. But what I can say is the fact that this is not a problem that is going to go away anytime soon, but with joint efforts as scientists, as journalists, as stakeholders coming together and trying to demystify all this by carrying out forums such as this, having scientists responding to certain concerns and questions, of course, you're going to at least achieve the kind of goal that we want. And the last question, sorry, Aruna, if I'm taking so much time. How do I blend art and science together if I want to hold an event like an art festival with science included? Wow. Thank you so much for this question, because it's something that I've mentioned. Actually, this is something that is new, that it has not been there for a very long time. But now you see, science is art itself. Science is art itself because it's something very unique. It's not something that comes every day. Let's look at gene drive technologies. It's not something that you see every day. It's art in itself. So if you just have a theme whereby you're having a festival that is science themed, and you come up with the tents, tables that have this what is it called? This term is lost. You're having expos. Yes, when you're having expos that is science-based and you're having activities going on, also including that with entertainment, because you can have, let's look at activities such as drama festivals. Here in Kenya, sorry for using so many examples from Kenya, because I come from Kenya, I can relate more. So here in Kenya, whenever you're having festivals going on, like drama festivals or music festivals, they're always themed. And maybe it's about, let's say, ending gender-based violence, or think of a topic. So you can have the festival, but all the activities, be it music, be it a poem, be it the whatever that's going on, it's revolving around the same thing. You're often given a theme, then you generate content that is around the same theme. So it's the same thing with the festival. If you are targeting to have a festival that is science-based, have a festival, partner with science individuals, science organizations, have a theme, ensure even if it's content creation, people are talking about science, even if it's people coming to do music or poems or dance, choreography and all that, it's science related. It's very possible by they to incorporate this in festivals. Thank you so much. I believe that's my last question, Aruna. And if any other individuals might have a question, probably I'll answer at the end of after the second presenter. Thank you so much.
OK. D'accord. Merci bien à Madame Cécilia. Et en tout cas, pour cette belle présentation et les différentes réponses apportées que les différents participants ont pu poser. Alors, nous allons sans plus tarder passer à la deuxième communication. Et nous allons d'abord procéder à la présentation du communicateur, qui est Monsieur Joseph Opoku Bako du Ghana. So let's us introduce the bio of Joseph in English. So Joseph Oboku is an agricultural education doctoral student in the Department of Agricultural and Human Science at the North Carolina State University, the United States of America. He is also pursuing a graduate minor in genetic engineering in society with research focus on how communication influence the deployment of agricultural technologies. He is a Ghanaian journalist with more than 15 years of experience covering science, environment, agriculture, parliamentary affairs, and rural development issues in Africa. He previously worked with Ghana's largest private media house, the Multimedia Group Limited, as a radio host, television reporter, and documentary producer. He has been recognized with 10 Ghanaian and international journalists awards, including the 2018 International Federation of Agricultural Journalists Star Prize Awards for the World Best Broadcast Video. He additionally worked as an Africa-based communication consultant who develops and implements communication plan for international development organization and private sector firms. Joseph holds and a BSc in agricultural biotechnology, a master in communication studies, and a master in liberal studies. He is also a 2016 Global Leadership Fellow of Cornell University Alliance for Science Program and the 2020 Agricultural Biotechnology in Our Involving Foods, Energy and Water System Fellow at NC State University. So Mr. Joseph will present on the gaps, challenge, and innovation in science communication that can help research advancement toward public awareness and acceptance of genetical technology. Welcome, Joseph Oboku. You have the floor. You have just 40 minutes to present your communication. You have the floor. Thank you.
Aruna, thank you very much. Hopefully, I will probably end up using even less time than that. I think the session Cecilia just delivered is quite an informative one. There's been a lot of things to think about following that presentation. It was nice to see all the wonderful approaches that science could possibly be communicated, including what happens in the museums and all. And so it's been good following that particular session. As you said, I'll be speaking on the gaps, the challenges, and innovations in science communication in terms of what could be done to possibly advance public awareness of some of these technologies and acceptance of some of these genetic technologies. I have quite some background in the agricultural space, and so in this conversation that we'll be having and what I'll be speaking about, you would end up hearing me citing a lot of examples that then relate to the agricultural industry when it comes to genetic engineering generally. But eventually I'll bring it home. I will eventually get to the health sector in the latter part of my presentation. What I intend to do by way of a quick outline is I will be telling 3 different stories from across 3 continents. I'll be telling a story from Africa, and then I would go ahead and tell another one from the Middle East, and then a final one from the United States of America. As a communications person and with my background in journalism, a lot of what I do is storytelling. So that helps me in terms of trying to throw out ideas and also that's eventually what I'll be doing. Tell the stories and then do a bit of reflection on some of the stories that I'll tell. So what you see here, a very scattered slide, if I could describe it as such, they are what we call press cuttings from publications that have been done on various Ghanaian media platforms over the last few weeks, 4 to 5 weeks or so. And it would help draw attention to a few things that I think remain gaps when it comes to communication in the entire biotechnology space, which I think is also helpful even in the space of biocontrol. So The first one that you see there was a publication that was put out by the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service, one of their reports that they put out on the 20th of March 2024. That's just about a month ago. And it had the title, Ghana Approves Commercialization of 14 New Genetically Engineered Products. So the USDA put out this report, and it circulated widely in Ghana across various platforms on WhatsApp and on other social media platforms. The understanding then being that this approval and commercialization had happened of various crops in Ghana, specifically soybean and also corn or maize, that was actually requested for by Bayer and Syngenta, which are two major agricultural biotechnology companies, as we all know. Now, this is the interesting part. After this publication got put out on the 20th of March and it was circulating widely, on various social media platforms and all, sometime on the 4th of April 2024, almost 2 weeks after this report was out there, the largest newspaper in Ghana, the Daily Graphic, the online platform of the Daily Graphic, put out the second press cutting that you see there with the title, Ghana Approves 14 New GMOs. And this was a story that was actually sourced solely from the USDA report. It had a different headline previously. Looks like the headline has since been amended. The headline previously had a point about commercializing, Ghana commercializing 14 new GE crops written there, which has since been updated. So that was also subsequently put out on the 4th of April 2024. Then the day after the Daily Graphic and its online platform, Graphic Online, published this story on this USDA report, which had been out since the 20th of March, that then had to do with an approval or various approvals that were given back in February. We saw other publications, including one by City Newsroom, making the point that the Ghana Agricultural Workers Union, GAU, has criticized the Ghana government over the promotion of GMO foods. And an official of GAU gave, quite some details on why they thought that it was a bad idea that the government had actually given the approval for these GM crops. Then a few days after that, the Peasant Farmers Association of Ghana, one of the major farmer groups in Ghana, also issued a statement. Ghana Web reported on that particular statement, and it had the headline, "You will destroy the agric sector with the approval of GMOs, peasant farmers to government." And in this statement, they went into details about how the government flagship agricultural policy having to do with the planting for food and jobs, they will not be accepting any GMO seeds that may come out through that pipeline to then cultivate on their farms. A few days after that, then other civil society groups also issued various statements. There's been statements from the Food Sovereignty Ghana. There's been other comments from a number of other organizations. So then the next press cutting you see there, pressure mounts on government to reverse approval of 14 new genetically modified products. And then subsequent to that, there's been another one by the Center for Climate Change and Food Security, making the point that, CCCFS opposes approval of new genetically modified products, cites health and environmental concerns. So all of these had unfolded in the media space over the period. And then eventually on the 12th of April, 2024, that's almost 1 week to a month after this USDA report started circulating in the media, we saw a statement from Ghana's National Biosafety Authority clarifying the point. And AsaseRadio.com reported on that statement from the Biosafety Authority. It came with the headline, "Ghana has not granted approval for 14 genetically modified seeds for cultivation," says National Biosafety Authority. And kindly give me my next slide, Carol. But one point to note, it took almost 24 days between when this report started circulating on various platforms in Ghana for the Biosafety Authority to eventually issue a statement clarifying what exactly had happened. And the statement had a few points that the NBA said that it had not granted approval for the seeds to be cultivated in Ghana. The authority says it's only registered 14 GM products to be imported into the country. The statement made the point that the 14 approved GM products are not for cultivation, but they are for the purpose of food, feed, or processing. And the statement made the point that the calls for the rejection of GM seeds that had been approved previously by the Biosafety Authority remained unfortunate. Carol, kindly give me my next slide. So if you look at what had unfolded in Ghana over the last month when it comes to these concerns, some of the gaps from my perspective as someone who pays attention to the communication space is that we had a lot of reactive communication instead of proactive communication. The Biosafety Authority didn't see the need to probably put out these details after it gave the approval sometime in February until the USDA reports put these statements out. And even after the USDA put out those details, the Biosafety Authority probably didn't find the need to come clarify until some media houses picked up the USDA publication and ran with it. And all these civil society groups then came criticizing the Biosafety Authority before we saw the Biosafety Authority issue a statement trying to clarify what exactly had happened. So there was reactive communication instead of proactive communication. And even the reactive communication ended up happening at a very slow pace, almost a month after that initial detail had been put out. And a lot of questions would come up on the part of a lot of Ghanaians who probably pay attention to the communication space. They'll be asking themselves, if the Biosafety Authority has done something in Ghana, why should we be hearing it first from the national, from the USDA, which is a foreign entity to a very large extent? Of course, it's not out of place for institutions to work with international partners to then go ahead and develop products and put those products out there and all, and having international partners support the policy space and all of that. But on conversations around a controversial controversial, you would expect that the Biosafety Authority will take a proactive lead in communicating. In this case, when the initial report was actually put out, those of us who are interested in the space went on the Biosafety Authority's own website after we saw the USDA report to then see if at least on the Biosafety Authority's website, even if they've not issued a statement to the media, what are they saying about this said reported approval that had happened? But guess what? There was no such information on the Biosafety Authority's website. I may be wrong, but then, of course, one gap could be that sometimes authorities may want to hoard some of this information to a certain extent because they may want to avoid any possible public backlash. But when you work with institutions like the United States Department of Agriculture, where in their own countries, they are very big on things like right to information and putting information out there, even if you try to hold on to the information, there's a chance that they'll go public with the information and end up creating a situation where you, the local authority, may end up being embarrassed to a certain extent. We also see a situation of what I think may be a low prioritization of communication generally, because if you look at the clarification that came up subsequently, that the approval was not for the cultivation of the seeds, but for the importation of the seed for food, feed, and processing, it does raise quite some questions, because then, as mentioned, these crops that had been approved include corn and soybeans. So you import a bag of corn, which is genetically modified, and insist that it's not for cultivation, but it came in a bag. The product is something that you would expect maybe people will make use of them to then feed their animals or maybe consume them on their own because then it's for food. But what came as maize in a bag is something that if someone just fetches a handful of those corn seeds, go to his backyard, dig a hole, put them in, sprinkle a bit of water on it, 3 months later, that genetically modified seed would end up germinating on its own. and it would be out there, and more of it will be out there. So again, if you ask me, this is something that if there was a communications person in the space being part of the conversation and the approval process and all, it's likely that individual may have spotted this, that we need to properly craft this communication in a way that won't end up being confusing to members of the public, so we appropriately communicate what we are trying to communicate. Because of course, what the Biosafety Authority did per the laws of the country was in order that you've approved a product for food, feed, and processing, not for cultivation. But on the ground, what exactly happens when it comes to the reality of it? So then we see the gaps where there isn't so much prioritization of communication for communication specialists to discuss some of these issues and develop possible scenarios. And then what ends up happening is a similarly confusing situation when it comes to the communication being put out there. And then the final gap that I observe, which again, for the records, I'm not picking on Ghana's National Biosafety Authority. I think this is a situation that's common across Africa when it comes to working on controversial technologies, whether it's about biocontrol, genetic engineering, biotechnology, and biosafety and all. This is something that's general across Africa and even in other parts of the world. But the next gap that I observed was a situation where it appears there's not been a deliberate galvanizing of science allies, because after these details came out, we've seen all the statements and the media interviews by those who oppose the technology raising the red flags, and the media is quoting them extensively. I may be wrong, but I've not seen any situation of the pro-science groups defending this technology under any circumstance. The Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in Ghana has a number of institutes that do biotech-focused work. The Crop Research Institute in Kumasi, the Savannah Agricultural Research Institute in Tamale. There are a number of science campaigning organizations. I'm involved in one of them called the Alliance for Science Ghana. We have a number of agricultural biotechnology projects running in Ghana, the Program for Biosafety Systems, the Open Forum on Agricultural Biotechnology, and a number of students studying agricultural biotechnology in universities in Ghana, including the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, where I studied. There are professors there who have a strong understanding of the space. This thing has been unfolding for almost a month. All we see are comments from those raising the red flags. We don't see any comments from those who are working on some of these technologies. And that's a huge gap worth paying attention to. And so what I think is important would be that going forward, regulators and science institutions, including Ghana's Biosafety Authority, need to take the steps to ensure more proactive communication when it comes to some of these issues. Because then even the biosafety laws that we have in a lot of countries, including Ghana, have specific provisions that encourage public engagement when it comes to approvals and conversations around some of these technologies going forward. Carol, kindly give me my next slide. So the general challenges in the space, beyond the specific gaps that I mentioned a while ago, are things that we all know. There are concerns about the complexity of scientific concepts, which then become very difficult to break down. And so then that posing a bit of a challenge for those communicating some of these technologies. There are concerns about misinformation and misconceptions, situations of people deliberately distorting some of this information when they are put out there, and people not getting a good grasp of it. So then it gets them to then draw conclusions that may not exactly represent the situation. There is talk about the concerns about language and jargon barrier, because then the point gets made that some of these technological innovations, there are no local languages that properly explain what exactly they are. There are cultural and societal differences. And in Ghana, that's very clear, even in large parts of Africa and even all over the world, that different societies have different cultural norms, some of which may support and some which may impede some of these conversations around some of these technologies. There's the talk about the deficit in trust, because then all over the world, there are concerns about the degradation of trust in government institutions. And so then even when approval comes from some of these big entities, then we see a very different response in terms of how people react subsequently. And then the media landscape is rapidly evolving, as we are seeing even with the example that I just cited from Ghana. Previously, I'm sure when my parents were growing up, in a lot of countries, you just have one broadcaster. What they say is what everyone listens to. In the 70s or even in the 60s and all, that's what the situation was. Whether what they are saying is actually boring or exciting, it's all that everyone gets to hear. Today, in Ghana alone, for example, there are more than 300 radio stations. There are more than 100 newspapers. There are hundreds of online platforms. Cecilia mentioned the point earlier about how information dissemination has moved on from just what you would describe as the one-to-many kind of system, where it's from a television to audiences sitting out there. Now it's a situation where everyone who is sitting online and has the computer and gets on a social media platform is virtually a citizen journalist who can report one thing or the other, and millions of people see that. So even within the media space, there is very rapid competition happening. And now it's no longer just the case that when the journalists get the story, they would have to sit on it and wait before then going ahead to break it. There is rapid competition to get the stories out there as a way to then gain the commercial advantage. And so as science communications people, what we should be doing is not to then wait for some of these developments to then be put out. Then we go back to the media people chasing them and taking them on for misinforming the public. What we should be doing is trying to then craft our messages and our ideas and all of that in a way that we would get ahead of those conversations, so that what the media gets to see from the point that they want to run with the story are the stories that the science promoters and the science communicators in the biocontrol, in the genetic engineering space actually want to tell. And then, of course, there are concerns about time constraints. The scientists are busy doing their work. They necessarily wouldn't have time to be involved in communication activities one way or the other. But then again, then that calls for the appropriate investments beyond just looking for funding to then develop the technology, but then budgeting appropriately for things like communication, which is why I'm really excited about this conversation that we are having here. And we have a situation where the consortium is paying a lot of attention to science communication, so that then that is very much part of the way that projects get implemented going forward. Carol, kindly give me my next slide. So that was story number 1 and a few reflections on that. Let me move on to story number 2. This is a story that I picked from Dr. Nimrod Israeli, and it came with the headline, "What's Wrong with These Farmers?" And it's a story that sits somewhere in the Middle East, once upon a time in a faraway land in the Middle East. Some farmers there worked their land from morning to night. The land was plenty and fertile. They had good sunshine, and they had running water within just a short distance of their farm field. So they virtually had everything that they need to then get their work done and to produce crops and feed themselves and feed their families and feed the people in the country. Although the farmers worked hard for long hours and gave all their strength, they barely managed to exist. They lived in austerity and poverty. They were suffering from diseases such as malaria. They were suffering from a lot of poverty, and they were suffering from a lot of hunger. Fortunately for these farmers, in a distant land lived some very rich people, some of whom even owned banks, who saw the suffering of these farmers, and their conscience yearned to help them. So the rich people sent the impoverished farmers significant financial support. The rich people asked for nothing in return and benefited nothing from it. They did so for years out of goodwill as a pure philanthropic act, but the farmers remained poor, hungry, and sick as they were before. So the philanthropists thought that the farmers didn't rate prosperity because they lacked proper advanced technological tools and plants to produce the agricultural produce that they needed. And so the philanthropists gave the farmers, for free of charge, many advanced technological tools and built buildings and factories to process the poor farmers' agricultural produce. But then the farmers remained poor, hungry, and sick as they were before. Then the philanthropists thought that there was a problem with the knowledge of how to use technological innovations and cultivate the land. And so they sent experts and advisors to this community in the Middle East to then advise the farmers on how to do their production. But then guess what? The farmers still remain poor, they remain hungry, and they remain sick. Well, the philanthropists didn't give up. They said, maybe training in the villages is not good enough. The training that they're having from these experts is not good enough. So then they built training centers, which they called centers of excellence for the farmers, so that then the farmers can go there, learn good agricultural practices, replicate it on their fields, so they can improve productivity. But still, the farmers remain poor, they remain hungry, and they remain sick. Well, the philanthropists still didn't give up. They pointed out that the problem may be stemming from poor management capability. So then they went ahead and appointed professional managers, deployed them to that Middle Eastern community to manage the training farm and then the affiliated farms. But even after these experts had gone to the ground to manage the situation for quite a while, the farmers remained poor, they remained hungry, and they remained sick. Well, they had all the resources: land, water, sunlight, dedicated farmers, dedicated workers. They had state-of-the-art technology on the site. They had the necessary financial resources. They had oversight from experts who are agronomists. But then it was still interesting that rather than achieving profits, the farmers were incurring losses, and they could not even have enough food to feed themselves and their families. So this is what happened next. The farm manager began to insult the farmers. He accused them of being lazy. He went ahead to invite workers from a nearby town to work on the farms in the community. The farmers saw this as a violation of their dignity. Some of the workers left the farms, and the rest, out of the loss of confidence, they began a strike. They demanded the dismissal of the farm manager. And then something unexpected happened that would forever change the agricultural sector in that community and subsequently their entire country. So the philanthropists and the power brokers thought that in order to settle the conflict between the farm managers and the farmers, they wouldn't dismiss the farm manager that the farmers were demanding that he be dismissed. However, in order to then mitigate any resistance, upon the workers' request, the power brokers allocated farmland on the other side of the river to an independent group of farmers for them to work as a team for 1 year as an experiment. So these workers would operate autonomously without direct oversight from the managers or their supervisors. They assumed full responsibility for the work. And then the agreement was that if there was any profit, they would split that profit 50-50 between themselves as farmers and then the training farm. And so with freedom from the managers and with a burning desire to provide the necessary inputs and to prove that they could do a better job without the managers and the supervisors, this group of farmers crossed the river and they immediately went to work. And so the picture you see there is actually from 1913. This was about 3 years after this controversy I just described had unfolded. And after these farmers moved onto that farm field across the river, in their very first year, they then began to then generate profits. They split the profits equally with the owners at the end of the farming season. And after they split the profits, this group of farmers decided that they wouldn't continue working on the new land. They will return to their own lands on the other side of the river. They moved away from that site and started farming back in their own communities. But then on the side across the river, which was where the new farm was, that place, a new group of farmers came in with the intention that they would want to replicate the same farming practices as the earlier innovative ones were doing. So the new group picked up on the concept. They established farmer groups across the community that were driven to work out of freedom and independence from managers and supervisors based on cooperation and equality. And there were a few limitations, but then the group managed to sustain itself. There were no deficits. They made a lot of money from the farm that year. And everybody heard about the success of the group, and they came to visit to become part of it and also to copy the secret. And as a result, in only a few decades, hundreds of other groups emerged, all being very thriving and prosperous. This blossom of thriving agro groups created a vibrant, prosperous agro sector with a sound economic basis, which then later enabled the formation of outstanding and an advanced and an innovative economy in this community, which subsequently spread to that country in the Middle East. raising the agriculture beyond the levels of their peers, and wonderful things happening within the agricultural sector there. So it became clear after several trials and errors that what was actually needed to ensure that the technological innovations and financial support ended up improving the lives of the people was having a well-organized farmer group led by the farmers themselves, free from the shackles of any so-called managers, operating from a training center with appropriate technological innovations and financial support. Once you have a system like that in place, the technology will flourish and the financial support will actually make a difference. It wasn't just about the technological innovation, it was about having systems approach to the deployment of the technology where several strands come together with the intention of pursuing a common agenda. If you focus solely on deploying the technology and don't think about the other strands like leadership, community organizing, independence, free will, and all of that, the expected success may not happen eventually. And this story is very similar to what happened with the Industrial Revolution that began in Manchester in Great Britain in the 1960s, that get copied all over the world and helped improve the lives of a lot of other people. When you read some of the books that describe the Industrial Revolution, it talks about how the Industrial Revolution was not just a technological innovation, but then there was also a socio-economic revolution, and there was a cultural revolution as well. So it wasn't just the technology, of course, the technology was part of it. There was the introduction of the iron steel, there was new energy from fuel and coal and steam and petroleum and electricity, and then there was the invention of machines and all. But then it didn't end there. There were socioeconomic changes as well. So there was the new organization of the workforce, there was the introduction of the factory system, which enabled increased division of labor, specialization of functions that was not there prior, and there were even cultural shifts. So by the 19th century, women who hitherto were supposed allegedly to be confined to the homes, whilst the men began working in some factories in Europe and elsewhere. And so that was a huge cultural shift beyond the introduction of the technological innovation. So the main point here is that technological innovations would have to happen in a model or systems approach that goes along with socioeconomic and cultural shifts if the technological innovation will be successful going forward. Carol, kindly give me my next slide. And so what are the gaps here that even as science communicators, we cannot fix alone, but we need to work with other stakeholders to help fix? There are concerns about inadequate local ownership of some of these technologies and resources, which we obviously need to help deal with. There's the absence of appropriate systems and models, just the ideas usually being, let's just deploy the technology, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the support gets seen as philanthropy instead of partnership, and sometimes we don't see interdisciplinary approaches to the deployment of the technology. And again, we then see situations where science communications end up happening in silos and not as a collective system. And so as science communicators, even as we think about external communication, let's also think about internal communication with our stakeholders that we work with. If we are working in biocontrol, we are working with geneticists, we are working with policymakers, we are working with funders. Let's ensure that there is communication happening at that level where we are encouraging those we are working with to ensure that some of these other challenges get fixed if science communication will be successful, and ensure that the deployment of these technologies end up working appropriately. Carol, kindly give me my next slide. I'm moving on to my final story for the day, and this is a story that sits somewhere in the United States of America, specifically Florida, the Florida state. And this is a true story. So we all know about the yellow fever mosquito. Anytime you are traveling to an Africa, you're asked to produce your yellow fever vaccination card. That yellow card that we all do have. But then this yellow fever mosquito also spreads a number of other diseases: the dengue fever, the Zika virus, the Mayura, and then it's also a disease agent for a number of other diseases. It's a crop that's native to us here in Africa and was spread to the rest of the world through the slave trade in the 1600s and then the 1700s. It's responsible for thousands of deaths all across the world, whether through the dengue fever or the Zika virus or some of these other diseases. There's been a lot of talk about the Zika virus, for example, because of the impact that it could have on children, because it's transmissible from mothers to newborn babies, and it could cause the malformation of babies with them having smaller heads and all another birth defect. So then there's been a lot of conversation around that. But the male yellow fever mosquitoes, they live off fruits, and it's the female ones that then bite and end up consuming blood and end up transmitting these diseases. Of course, for folks of you in this space with the consortium, I know I don't have to tell you about some of these issues. These are things that you know already. I'm only just reiterating them to then go ahead and make a point. We know that there's been the development of the technology with the genetically modified mosquitoes, which have been modified to then carry a self-limiting gene to then prevent the female mosquito offspring from surviving to adulthood, as one of the ways to then control these mosquitoes and stop the spread of some of the diseases that the mosquitoes spread. And we know that Oxitec, which is a UK-based company, it's now owned by another US biotech company. They are one of the pioneers of this technology, and they began working on genetically modified mosquitoes and all of that back in the early 2000s, around 2002, with some of their products being deployed in Brazil, the Cayman Islands, Panama, Malaysia, and elsewhere. Now, in the early 2010s, the local government authorities in Florida Keys, which is in the Florida state in the US, invited Oxitec to then explore how their technology could be used to then deal with these mosquitoes in their area. There was a lot of opposition as expected, a lot of anti-GM campaigning groups, Friends of the Earth, a number of other environmentalists, even some medical personnel kicking against that particular plan. There were even some protests on the street kicking against any conversation around releasing these genetically modified mosquitoes to then control the Zika virus and all. So eventually, the local authorities there, the local government there decided that they will put this issue to a vote. So there was a referendum in November 2016, and many people expected that the public will vote against this said deployment of GM mosquitoes going forward. But then guess what? When the results of the referendum were announced eventually, there was overwhelming local support for the release of the GM mosquitoes. About 31 of the 33 communities in the precinct of the county voted in favor. More than 58% of all the voters voted in favor of the deployment of this technology, although, of course, one of the areas, the Key Haven, where the experiment was supposed to happen, the voters there kicked against it. But the majority of them voted in support of the deployment. This to date is more like the only referendum I know of on biological control and genetically modified organisms in the world that I have ever come across or read of or anything like that. I know that there's been some referendum in the US in places like Oregon on whether GMO should be labeled or they shouldn't be. But then this is the only referendum where the people were asked specifically, do you want genetically modified organisms in your environment or you don't want? And the majority of the people said, yes, we want the genetically modified organisms in our environment to control these mosquitoes so we can avoid diseases like the Zika. So I will not be surprised that if there are more such referendums on things like GMOs, things like biocontrol around the world, we may end up seeing similar results where majority of the people end up voting in favor of. Again, this is a hypothetical situation based on no empirical evidence. But then the fact is that those who are in favor of some of these technologies are usually silent. You don't hear them speak. And then that allows those who are against some of these biocontrol and biotechnology tools to be out there, loud in the media, loud on social media. And that ends up giving the impression that the populace is against some of these technologies and the government is trying to impose the technology on the people. And so my point here is that as science communicators, never be shy of promoting your science, whether at public gatherings, whether at the dinner table, whether on social media, when you get the chance to be on radio or TV. never be shy of promoting some of these technologies that you are working on. There is a high chance that many people in your audience who are listening to you may hold that similar view, except that they haven't had the chance to voice their support, or they haven't had the chance to cast their vote in a referendum like what the folks in Florida case had, to be able to then vote with their hand by throwing their support behind some of these technologies. Carol, kindly give me the next slide, which is actually my final slide. I'll round up in the next 3 minutes so we can probably have a conversation on the back of this. So how do we encourage acceptance through science communication? Let me go ahead and take it from the bottom, that the media should be taken seriously by those communicating the science. There should not be a situation where there is the assumption that we can keep the media out of the space, even in the development and deployment of some of these technologies. There should be the construction of a system when it comes to the communication, so that it's not just a case of throwing out the information there, but then building a model for the general acceptance or adoption of the technology that has a strong communication component. There should be the continuous strategizing by various allies on how to then do the communication. I won't bedevil that point, because then I've already said a lot about having allies and them helping with the conversation already. There should be transparency. There should be no ideas around trying to hide some of these informations from members of the public when you are developing these technologies and seeking to deploy them for use by the public. There should be continuous public engagement. Those running some of these initiatives should think about communication right from the start. It should not be an afterthought. The idea of communicating some of these technologies should be built into the development of some of these initiatives, so that then there is appropriate budgetary allocation and there are enough communication specialists to then help with the communication processes. One other point we should all have in mind is that there will always be backlash. Don't be discouraged. The backlash may be coming from a small group of people, sometimes from a large group of people, but sometimes it will be so strong that it could be discouraging. Just have it on the back of your mind that it's about the public good that some of these works are being done, and then keep going. Also acknowledge that it's not everyone who would get on board. There would always be that population that are against whatever technologies are being deployed. So keep going, even regardless of the opposition that comes. And all such folks working in the space need to learn to tell your own stories. It shouldn't happen like what happened with these approvals in Ghana that I referenced to, where a foreign entity told the story earlier before those who owned the story with the approval came back to then clarify misconceptions about the story. Own your story and go ahead and tell those stories. And then the final point is encouraging what has been described as values-based messaging. Of course, when we have a conversation around whether we should deploy genetically modified mosquitoes into the environment, there are those who would say, I'm against it. There are those who would say they are for it. But if we move the conversation away from that, where those who are promoting the technology want to throw in facts and details and figures and statistics to say this works, this is beneficial, as the initial way that they begin the conversation, once that gets done, once you begin throwing the facts and throwing the data out there about how genetic modification of mosquitoes work to then control some of these diseases, the other individual will push back with similar facts and data and statistics about how some of these technologies may probably not work. But if you begin from a value standpoint, there are some values that we all share regardless of where you stand. We all want to have a healthier population, free of malaria, free of Zika, whether you lie on the right or lie on the left, as long as you're a level-headed human being, that's a common value we all share. We can begin the conversation from there before veering into the specifics of what the statistics look like and what the data looks like. And so thanks very much to all of you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Merci à M. Joseph pour cette brillante communication. Nous allons à présent voir s'il y a des questions qui ont été posées par les différents participants afin que M. Joseph puisse apporter des réponses adéquates. Mais bien avant, je pense que j'ai une question à la suite de sa présentation sur les gaps et les challenges ainsi que les innovations en sciences de la communication. Et j'avais une question qui concerne un peu la consultation du public, puisqu'il a également parlé un peu des différentes lois ou des différents tests dans les différents pays, où il est question des tests souvent qui parlent un peu de la participation du public. Je dirais que ma question tombe bien parce que comme c'est un communicateur et un scientifique également, voici la nature de ma question. Est-ce que au stade du milieu confiné ou au stade de recherche en labo, est-ce qu'il est important de consulter le public avant de poursuivre les différentes expérimentations? Ça, c'est ma question. Voilà. Est-ce qu'il pourra répondre, et M. José pourra répondre à cette question et on verra. Oui.
Aruna, can you kindly
Ok,
summarize that
ok.
very
Donc,
briefly?
je disais que grandement merci à M. Joseph pour cette brillante communication. En tout cas, il nous a beaucoup édifié à travers les différentes informations, les différentes histoires un peu qu'il a un peu racontées à travers les trois contrées. Mais pour moi, ma préoccupation concerne beaucoup plus la participation du public. La participation du public parce que lui-même, il est venu sur ça en disant que le public, la participation du public fait partie souvent des tests que les pays prennent au sein des législations pour pouvoir encadrer un peu, voir comment engager le public dans les processus de recherche. Alors, pour moi, est-ce que, étant donné qu'il est un scientifique et un communicateur, je pense qu'il serait mieux placé pour répondre à ma question, est-ce que, au stade des recherches en milieu confiné ou peut-être des recherches en laboratoire, est-ce qu'il est nécessaire de consulter le public avant de pouvoir poursuivre les expérimentations? C'est suffisamment clair?
Aruna, if you could summarize that in 30 seconds in English for me, it would be helpful so I can respond.
I think I can do it. It's okay. Aruna, let me just read
Yeah.
out the question as it was asked. So I would also like to hear your perspective on this, Joseph. So someone is saying, thank you for your session. Is there a way to balance between proactive and reactive communication so as not to raise an alarm in society?
I agree with that very much. There's talk about how when it comes to some of the controversial technologies, nuclear energy, genetic engineering, the more information an individual has, the higher the chance of that individual fearing the technology. So there should be that good balance between proactive and reactive. But the point still remains that the engagement must be continuous and not one-off, and it should have a specific objective. Thank you.
Allô, vous êtes là? Allô?
Yes. If there are any more questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. We have to thank all our two speakers. Yeah. Yes, for the great information that we learned today. And we also thank all the participants who joined this webinar. We know that we have spent a lot of time today. Yes, to follow this webinar. Thank you to everyone. And we will thank the SciComm for the organization, for the facility for us to join this webinar. And we will inform you about the next date of the webinar. And I hope that was if but if the secretary of the SciComm have some message to address to participants, if it is okay, we can give the floor to Caroline to address some word to the participant before we end the webinar. Caroline, please, can you say something?
So, Aruna, I do not have anything to add, but I just echo your words. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for joining the webinar.
Okay. Okay. So, thank you very much. Bon, merci à tout le monde. Bonsoir du côté du Kenya, du côté du Ghana, du côté du Burkina et du côté en tout cas, du Nigeria, de toute l'Afrique. Merci à toutes et à tous pour avoir participé à cette session du webinaire, la troisième du genre. Je pense qu'il y aura encore d'autres sessions à venir et nous vous tiendrons informés des différentes dates. Merci à tous et à tous. Au revoir et à très bientôt. Bye.
Thank you.